Well, today America celebrates Columbus Day, honoring that famous voyage that opened Europe to the New World. But historians are revisiting that voyage. Our guest today, William J. Connell, Ph.D., LaMotta Chair at Seton Hall University, to shed some light on the new questions that scientists have today.
Well, thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be back here with you. It's an interesting thing, the way our views of Columbus Day have changed over the centuries now. In the 500th anniversary of the celebration of the 500th anniversary of Columbus's voyage in 1992, the world was really coming to grips finally as a result of scientific and historic research with the human costs of what's now called the Columbian Exchange, involving largely an exchange of diseases, among other things. But I think that now we're coming to a new realization that that this was, in a way, the creation of the modern world. And that it's something that needs to be remembered, studied, and maybe commemorated rather than celebrated.
And certainly an event that celebrates the exchange or the creation rather, of a new type of society. You know, a lot of Europeans in the aftermath came trying to escape places that they felt were unfair, and now here they come to America, something different.
Oh, nicely put, Brian. I think it's very helpful to look at when Columbus Day was first celebrated in the United States in 1892. President Benjamin Harrison proclaimed that Columbus would be marked and taught in all of the schools. And there was a parade in New York City, the very first Columbus Day parade in October 1892. And I see it as an important moment in the country when we realize that this is a nation that's going to be made up of immigrants and also of the people who were here when people first started coming to the shores of the New World.
Well, let me ask you this. There's all of this, you know, we've often learned as kids that Columbus was the first to discover that the world was round. Was he the only sailor at the time, navigator that held this view?
Oh, no, that's not true at all. In fact, I don't think there was anybody who believed that the world was flat back in the 15th century. There's a marvelous book about that. But it's interesting, the idea that the world was flat, or that people thought that the world was flat, was invented by none other than Washington Irving, the man who wrote the Tales of Sleepy Hollow and the story of Rip Van Winkle.
Wow.
He wrote a huge book about Columbus that pretended to be sort of like a history, but was really largely fictional. And it tells the story of Queen Isabella pawning her jewels, of people believing that the world was flat.
So he promoted a lot of myths in this book.
He certainly did. He was a very popular author, too.
Wow. And so now we've come to find out that, in fact, this was a conventional thinking. The world was round, and we were going to find out.
Yeah.
Wasn't he on his way to India or looking for that part of the world? Was Columbus really lost?
Well, Columbus, he was in partly lost. He was clever in figuring out the wind patterns that would bring him to America, or bring him across the Atlantic, and then most importantly, winds that would bring him back again. But he was aided by this great mistake that he made in thinking that the world is much smaller than it is. Right. And so he thought that distance from Europe to Asia was much tinier, smaller than.
They didn't know what was in between,
and he didn't know that there was anything in between, and so he even died still thinking that he had found a route to Asia.
Wow! So what do we take from Columbus today?
Well, what we take is that this is the guy who was the first person, and there's a kind of incredible human drama in being the first person. Neil Armstrong, but with huge consequences. There weren't people on the moon. Tragic consequences, but opportunities for creation, for building. And he, as I said earlier, in a way made it possible for the world that we now know to come into existence.
So still worth celebrating.
Certainly commemorating, celebrating. If you're going to have a holiday in October, it seems to me that this is a decent reason to have one.
Let me ask you about this art exhibit in New York, where Japanese artists built, I guess, a temporary living room Have you been there? Have you seen this?
I have. It was a real experience, and I met the artists too. At Columbus Circle in New York City, there's a statue built by Italian-American groups in the 1890s to commemorate Columbus. What Nishi did, and it's in a way diffuses many of the hostile reactions and the very difficult debate around Columbus to climb up the scaffolding, enter this living room that the artist has created around the statue, and look at Chris face to face.
Wow.
To confront him and
right?
contemplate him as a human being, and ask the amazing question: What would you do? What would you do, Brian, if suddenly you found yourself on an island with people who came from God knows where, you don't know where,
who look
somewhat, yeah, and yet they're also human beings.
Yeah. Interesting story. We haven't heard the last of it. Dr. Connell, always a pleasure to have you. Join us again.
Brian. Delighted to be here.